VIJAYI BHAVA. Jai Hind दोस्तों. In today's video, I will be giving out little experts on how various armies, that is the Pakistan army, the Portugal army, and also the Nizam's Hyderabad army surrendered in front of our esteemed Indian armed forces. This shows the steel and valor that our soldiers display when they go into battle, that they make the enemy kneel down in front of them and surrender unconditionally. The victory of the Indo-Pak War of 1971, for which we celebrate the Vijay Divas, which is the victory of the Indian Armed Forces on the Pakistani Armed Forces on 16th of December 1971. This day is basically the day when the Pakistan Armed Forces surrendered unconditionally in front of the Indian Armed Forces at Dhaka, and this, mind it, is one of the biggest surrenders in the world. Till now, there has not been a bigger surrender of any forces in front of the victorious army. Pakistan launched its Operation Changis with a preemptive aerial strikes on 11 Indian air stations. This was the declaration of war by Pakistan on 3rd of December 1971. This 13-day war culminated in basically surrender of the Pakistan army and creation of Bangladesh, in which East Pakistan became Bangladesh. The reason for this war was sparked by the Bangladesh Liberation War, which was already a conflict between the dominant West Pakistanis and the majority East Pakistanis. The Awami League, which won the elections, were not allowed to form their government because the West Pakistanis were against it. Also, there was mayhem of rape, murder, loot, and oppression on the East Pakistani by the armed forces. These were some of the main reasons why the East Pakistani Bengalis uprose, and the movement for the Bengali language or upkeep of it was taken up by the citizens of this country because they were treated as second-grade people. During this, the Bengali refugees started coming onto the neighboring states of eastern India, and Indian government repeatedly appealed to the international community for assistance but failed to elicit any response. The Minister for External Affairs, Swaran Singh, met many of the foreign ministers of the other countries, but it was all in vain. At that time, Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi expressed full support of her government for the independence struggle for the people of East Pakistan, and on the behest and support of her government, she called the Chief of Army Staff of that time, General Sam Manekshaw, and asked him go into the east and have war. At that, General Manekshaw said, Mrs. Prime Minister, this is not the right time for war. I will have the war at my time and my requirements. So give me some time to prepare and you get international support. So with that, the Indian Army started preparing, and Mrs. Gandhi had the Treaty of Cooperation and Friendship signed with the Soviet Union, so that in case the war went on and US and UK also jumped into the fray, we had the support of our dear friend, the USSR. On the 3rd of December, like I said, Operation Changis was launched and the official declaration of war began. When these preemptive strikes were fought back by our Air Force, the tanks crossed over on the western and the eastern border, for which our army was fully prepared, and also the Pakistan army was preparing, seeing our preparations on board. The Air Force was also prepared and aerial strikes were carried out, and the armor was effectively supported by the arty shellings and also the aerial attacks on both the fronts of the west and the east. The Navy was also geared up and they were continuously keeping a watch on the Karachi airport, and their activities of the Navy or the Pakistan Navy were thwarted off on many attempts by them to try and break our trade lines. On 9th December 1971, the submarine Hangor sank INS Kukri, and this was followed by a very valiant attack on the Karachi port, which was codenamed the Python. The port was damaged to quite an extent by our OSA missile boats and the Soviet acquired strike missiles. The Pakistan Air Force did not attack the Indian Navy ships, and there was confusion because the Pakistan Air Force was not very proactive, and in retaliation to our 4,000 air sorties on both the fronts, they carried out even less than half of these sorties, because their Air Force, though may be technically superior in the infrastructure, were low in training by their pilots. In the eastern sector, the ports of Dhaka and Chittagong were kept guarded by our INS Vikrant, so that in case of any naval action on this front could be blocked off very effectively. The action by our ground forces in the western sector was basically not to let the Pakistan Army get onto our territory, that is across the international borders in Rajasthan and Punjab. And in the eastern sector, the aim was basically to encircle Dhaka and capture it and get the Pakistan Army in the East Pakistan to kneel down and surrender unconditionally. During this course, the Battle of Longewala, the Battle of Basantar, the Battle of Gangasagar, the airdrops at Tangail were also conducted. These were operations within this war, which basically culminated in crushing down of the Pak Army and also the Air Force. All this was very successfully culminated on the 16th of December 1971, when the Pak Army in the eastern Pakistan surrendered unconditionally, and this was the biggest surrender in the world, with about 93,000 soldiers putting down their arms. So, as we have seen in the other videos also, India has convincingly crushed Pakistan in all the sectors or all the arenas of the armed forces, that is the Air Force, Navy and the Army. Another surrender to the esteemed Indian armed forces is by the Portuguese Army, during which the Estado da India, or which is called the Portuguese occupied India, that is territories of Goa, Daman and Diu. This area was basically the colony of the Portuguese, and also during the British time, Goa, Daman and Diu were under the rule of Portugal. The British never interfered and tried to take over these areas, but after independence in 47, as this was a landlocked area, the Republic of India in 1950 sent an aide de memoire to the Portuguese government to give up this area and decolonize it. But the Prime Minister of Goa, Salazar, did not agree to it and asked his army to fight the Indian armed forces to the last man, which I think was a stupid move, because his military advisors were against it. So again, we had an unconditional surrender by the Portuguese army in that area to our Indian armed forces. This armed action was also codenamed as Operation Vijay, means victory in Sanskrit. The operations are generally given these names, like in Kargil also it was called Op Vijay, but Kargil was at a larger scale than what was there in Goa. The background of this localized war was basically because these enclaves or districts of Goa, Daman and Diu, Dadra and Nagar Haveli collectively were called the Estado de India, and the religious distribution was about 60% Hindu, 37% Christians and 2% Muslims. Between the 1940 to 1950, there was an unarmed conflict for freedom, because there was a freedom fight happening in India against the Britishers. So the citizens here also wanted to be part of the Indian Republic and not be under the colonial rule of Portugal. Resistance to the Portuguese rule in Goa in the 20th century was pioneered by Tristão de Bragança Cunha. He was a French-educated Goan engineer who founded the Goa Congress Committee, that is in the Portuguese India. This was done in 1928, and later on this silent revolution was happening, and also the support of the other freedom fighters of India was done silently. In June 1946, Ram Manohar Lohia entered Goa to visit a friend, and he founded the Gomantak Praja Mandal in Bombay and edited the weekly newspaper Gomantak. This was not liked by the ruling Portuguese at that time, and he was sent out from these districts when he came to visit his friend, because they thought his actions would act as a rebellion. But then there was unrest happening within the citizens, and groups like the Azad Goa Mantak Dal, that is the Free Goa Party, the United Front of Goans and such other groups started appearing. Though the ruling Portuguese government tried to subdue these uprisings, but they were growing day by day. So on 27th February 1950, the government of India asked the Portuguese government to open negotiations to talk about the future of the Portuguese colonies in India. But the Portuguese government was not ready to cede any of the territories. The Portuguese government refused to respond to any of the aide de memoirs which was given out by the Indian government. Also, that time in 1954, the Republic of India instituted visa restrictions on travel for people from Goa and also put lot of sanctions to constrict the trade and also the activities in this territory. At that time, the conflict became armed, and there were armed activists which started taking place in this little colony. On 15th August 1955, about 3,000 to 5,000 unarmed Indian activists attempted to enter Goa at 6 locations and were violently repulsed by the Portuguese police officers, resulting in deaths of about 30 people. This put in a sense of oppression in the local from the Portuguese government. This was the time when the consulate at Lisbon was also withdrawn to show the discontentment against the Portuguese government and the non-respondent of the aide de memoirs. This was the time when the Prime Minister of Portugal, Salazar, tried to garner support of the United Nations Security Council and also asked US to intervene, to which the US did write to India to cut down the sanctions. But then on 24th November 1961, Sabarmati, a passenger boat passing between the Indian port of Kochi and the Portuguese held island of Anzideu was fired upon by the Portuguese ground troops, which resulted in the death of a passenger and injuries to the chief engineer. This was the time when our Prime Minister decided to take military action against the Portuguese army in that locality. So on 10th December 1961, Operation codenamed VIJAYI was launched. On receiving the go-ahead for military action, the 17th Infantry Division under Major General Kandet and 50th Para Brigade under Brigadier Sagat Singh took it upon themselves and assaulted the locality of Daman and Diu, and the 1st Battalion of the Maratha Light Infantry carried out operations in Diu. Also, 20th Battalion of the Rajput Regiment and the 5th Madras were involved in the complete annexation of the territories of Daman and Diu. The mandate basically handed over to the Air Force was also destruction of the Goa's lone airfield in Dabolim without causing damage to the terminal building and the airport facilities, destruction of the wireless station at Bamboli in Goa, denial of airfields at Daman and Diu, and also support any of the advancing troop. The Indian Navy also deployed its INS Rajput and INS Kripal and other flotilla of ships, that is the Mysore, Trishul, Betwa, Byas and Kaveri, were put into action, and a carrier group of 5 ships, the Delhi, the INS Kuthar, Kirpan, Kukri and the INS Vikrant were put on alert so that any action by the Portuguese Navy in that area could be thwarted off effectively. At this stage, the Portuguese Prime Minister gave out a very unrealistic requirement to his troops that they should resist the Indian Armed Forces to the last man and not cede territory. This was not agreed by the army minister and the defense attaches, but then Prime Minister Salazar was hell-bent upon not decolonizing Goa. So the annexation of Goa started happening, and Indian Armed Forces combined attacked the Portuguese troops. The civilians were evacuated to Bombay and then ahead to Portugal, and the Portuguese army in that area unconditionally put down their arms and surrendered to the Indian army. The Portuguese surrender took place on 18th of December. The official Portuguese surrender took place at 8:30 in the evening on 19th of December, when the Governor General Manuel Antonio Vasales de Silva signed the instrument of surrender unconditionally to end the 451 years of Portuguese rule in Goa. In this, all 4,000 plus soldiers were taken as POWs and put up in the army camp. So this is the second incident in which the Portuguese army had to surrender in front of our Indian armed forces. The third incident, when the Nizam's army in Hyderabad surrendered and laid down their arms in front of the army or the Indian army. This operation was called Operation Polo, in which military action was taken to get the area of Hyderabad, which the Nizam thought would stay independent and support Pakistan. This ideology was not allowed, and in this the Indian army and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel had a big role to play. So at the time of partition in 1947, these princely states, which were self-governed within their own territory, were subsidiary alliances with British. And when the Indian Independence Act of 47 was put into vogue, the British abandoned all these princely states and left them for their own decision to either stay independent or join the Republic of India. And one such major, wealthy and popular principality of Hyderabad, where the Nizam Mir Usman Ali Khan Asaf Jah VII, who was a Muslim ruler and presiding over a largely Hindu population, chose independence and hoped to maintain this with an irregular army. So to maintain his independence, he signed a standstill agreement with the Dominion of India, and which in this he wanted basically to stay independent, have his own army, but still reap the benefits of being with our republic, which were not agreed to by our government. But then, seeing the attitude of the Nizam, our government thought that we would be nurturing a communist state in Hyderabad, and India invaded the state in September 1948 and created an economic blockade in which the state was destabilized by railway disruptions, bombing of government buildings and raids on the border villages. And this led to the Nizam sign an instrument of accession for joining of India. This operation led to basically mass violence on communal lines, which were perpetrated by the Indian Army. In 1947, the last Nizam approached the last ruling Viceroy of India, Viscount Mountbatten, to stay independent and also to be given a status of a country in the Commonwealth nations, which was turned down and rejected. This was the time when this Nizam went in for a maverick standstill agreement, and that was the time when India felt that the Nizam would create a communist rebellious state within the republic. So B.R. Ambedkar, who was the law minister, considered the state of Hyderabad to be a new problem which may not turn out to be worse than the Hindu-Muslim problem, as it is sure to result in the further balkanization of India. So why did the Indian government not have faith in the standstill agreement? That was because the Nizam tried to garner support and approached the Union nation, also approached Pakistan for funds, started raising a semi-shoddy kind of army with Razakars and other mercenaries. So this was basically the reason why Indian government started losing faith in the Nizam, because he thought he wanted to be independent, reap the fruits from Pakistan, the UN, the British, and also from the Republic of India. As it is, uprisings were also there because the state was mostly Hindu, and also the Telangana rebellion of 1945 had uprisen because the land of the locals were not being given to them, and that was the time when these communists targeted the Jamindars and the Hindu Deshmukhs, and they launched a full-fledged revolt against the Nizam. And this was a conflict between the Razakars and the communists, which became violent. And this was what, after 47, the Indian government did not want to blow up into beyond proportions. Also, Hindu-Muslim riots were very common in this small dominion of Hyderabad, which at times took larger proportions. And this was also one of the reasons why the Indian government did not want this maverick state to stay alive. So this was the time when Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel gave orders to the Indian Army to take action and enter Hyderabad and take it into its complete control. And this task was placed in the hands of Lieutenant General Rajendra Singh Ji, the attack from Sholapur was led by Major General J.N. Chaudhary, who later on went to become the army chief. He had 4 task forces: the strike force, comprising a mix of fast-moving infantry, cavalry and light artillery; the smash force, consisting of predominantly armor units and artillery; kill force, composed of infantry and engineering units; and fourthly, the Veer force, which comprised of infantry, anti-tank and engineering units. The attack from Vijayawada was led by Major General Ajit Rudra, comprising of the 2nd by 5th Gurkha Rifles, 1 squadron of the 17th Pune Horse and a troop of the 19th Field Battery, and along with it were engineering and ancillary units. In addition, 4 infantry battalions were to neutralize and protect lines of communication. 2 squadrons of Hawker Tempest aircrafts were prepared for air support from the Pune base in case of any contingency. The date for attack was 13th September. Even though General Roy Sir Butcher, in these 5 days, there was some resistance by these maverick army created by the Nizam, consisting of Razakars, some regular soldiers and mercenaries from different places. But they were in no way in competition with the trained army of the Republic of India. So on 16th September, faced with imminent defeat, the Nizam, Mir Sir Usman Ali, summoned his Prime Minister Mir Laik Ali and requested his resignation by the morning of the following day. The resignation was delivered along with the resignations of the entire cabinet, and at noon of 17th September, the unconditional surrender took place. According to the records, General Chaudhary led an armored column into Hyderabad at around 4 p.m. on 18 September, and the Hyderabad army, led by Major General L. Eldoros, surrendered to him and laid down his arms by taking off his belt and cap in front of him. During this period and also afterward, there were communal violences in that area, but then they were slowly quenched down. So, ladies and gentlemen, you saw how the valiant Indian Armed Forces has always crushed any army which tries to raise its head in front of the sovereignty of the Republic of India and makes it surrender unconditionally and creates records. That is the biggest surrender in the world, that is after the Indo-Pak War. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the stories or the gathas of our esteemed army. We would be grateful if you keep watching these videos and learn more about our armed forces, and I will request you to please give your critical comments in the comment section, and also give ideas for any other kind of educative videos on the army or on life skill issues that can be taken up by us. Jai Hind.